All right, let's get right into this because what's happening is genuinely unprecedented. Ron DeSantis, the governor who built his entire political brand on strength, on having all the answers, on Florida being the model for the rest of America, is now behind closed doors reportedly begging for help from anyone who will listen. Federal officials, insurance industry executives, financial institutions, real estate developers. He's making desperate calls trying to find someone, anyone, who can help him stop the complete meltdown of Florida's housing market. And the fact that he's reached this point tells you just how catastrophic the situation has become. Let's start with what meltdown actually means in this context, because this isn't just market volatility or a normal correction. A housing meltdown is when all the systems that make a housing market function simultaneously fail. And that's exactly where Florida is right now. The insurance market has collapsed. Property values are in free fall in many areas. Transactions have dried up because buyers can't get financing. Foreclosures are spiking. Homeowners are trapped, unable to sell, but also unable to afford staying. The construction industry is in crisis. Local governments are watching tax revenues evaporate. The entire housing economy is melting down in real time. And DeSantis is panicking because he knows this destroys everything he's tried to build politically. His entire narrative was that Florida is thriving, that people are flooding in from other states, that his policies create prosperity and freedom. But a housing meltdown exposes that narrative is false. People aren't flooding into Florida anymore. They're trying to leave. The policies didn't create sustainable prosperity. They created a bubble that's now bursting catastrophically. And DeSantis is watching his political legacy collapse along with the housing market. Let's talk about the insurance situation first, because this is the primary trigger of the meltdown. Homeowners insurance in Florida has moved beyond crisis into complete system failure. Citizens Property Insurance, the state-backed insurer of last resort, is now covering over 1.4 million properties, and that number is growing by thousands every single week. It was never designed to be this large. It doesn't have adequate reserves. And everyone in the insurance industry knows that when the next major hurricane hits a populated area, citizens will be bankrupted. What happens when your insurance company goes bankrupt? You have a destroyed home and no money to rebuild. Your policy is worthless. You lose everything. And there are over 1 million Florida homeowners facing exactly this risk right now. They're paying premiums for insurance that might not be there when they actually need it. That's not insurance. That's a scam, but it's the only option available for millions of Floridians. Private insurers continue to flee. The few that remain are charging premiums that are absolutely astronomical. We're talking $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 a year or more for insurance on ordinary middle-class homes. And even at those prices, coverage is often limited, with huge deductibles and exclusions. Homeowners are paying a fortune for inadequate protection. This insurance meltdown directly causes the housing market to melt down because without insurance, you cannot get a mortgage. And without mortgages, you cannot have a functional housing market. Only cash buyers can purchase homes, and there aren't nearly enough cash buyers to sustain a market. So transactions are collapsing. In some Florida markets, sales volume is down 40, 50, 60% from peak levels. Homes sit on the market for months with no viable offers. The market is frozen, and DeSantis is begging for help because he has no idea how to fix this. He tried tort reform, claiming that limiting lawsuits against insurance companies would lower rates. It didn't work. Rates kept climbing. He tried encouraging private insurers to take policies from citizens. They won't do it because the risk-reward doesn't make sense. He's tried everything within his ideological comfort zone, and nothing has worked. So now he's begging the federal government for help, the same federal government he's spent years attacking and criticizing. According to reports, DeSantis has been on calls with federal officials trying to get federal disaster relief expanded, trying to get federal insurance programs created or expanded for Florida, trying to get federal money for coastal resilience and adaptation. This is the same governor who built his brand on opposing federal overreach and championing state independence. But now that Florida is in crisis, suddenly he wants federal help. The hypocrisy is stunning, But more importantly, it shows how desperate the situation has become. Let's talk about what's happening to property values, because this is devastating homeowners across Florida. In many markets, home values have dropped 15, 20, 25% or more from peak levels. In the most vulnerable coastal and flood-prone areas, the drops are even more severe. Some properties have lost 40 or 50% of their value. Homeowners who bought at the peak are catastrophically underwater, owing far more than their homes are currently worth. This creates an impossible situation. If you need to sell, you can't get enough to pay off your mortgage. You'd have to bring tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars to closing just to get out of the property. Most people don't have that kind of cash, so they're trapped. They can't sell, but they also can't afford to stay because insurance is $20,000 a year and property taxes keep rising. They're financially imprisoned in homes that are losing value and costing them a fortune. Some homeowners are just walking away. Strategic defaults are increasing. People are deciding it doesn't make financial sense to keep paying a mortgage on a home that's worth less than they owe and costs a fortune to insure. So they stop paying and let the home go into foreclosure. This is rational from an individual perspective, but it's catastrophic for the broader market because foreclosures add to inventory, which drives prices down further, which puts more people underwater, which leads to more foreclosures. It's a death spiral, and DeSantis is begging for help because he knows foreclosure waves destroy communities and tank local economies. Property values falling means property tax revenues falling, which means local governments can't provide services, which makes areas even less desirable, which drives values down more. It's a negative feedback loop that's incredibly difficult to stop once it starts. And it's happening right now across Florida. The construction industry is in meltdown too. New home construction has collapsed because builders can't sell homes in a market where buyers can't get insurance or financing. Existing projects are being abandoned mid-construction. Construction workers are losing jobs by the thousands. Suppliers are going out of business. The entire construction ecosystem that was booming just 2 years ago is now imploding. This matters enormously because construction is a huge part of Florida's economy. When construction collapses, it ripples through everything. Building supply stores close. Real estate agents lose income. Mortgage brokers have no business. Title companies lay off staff. Property management companies struggle. It's not just about construction jobs. It's about the entire economic web that depends on a functioning housing market. DeSantis is reportedly begging real estate developers to keep building, to keep investing in Florida, but they're not stupid. Why would a developer invest in building homes that they can't sell? Why would they build in areas where insurance is unavailable or unaffordable? The economics don't work, and no amount of begging from DeSantis is going to change the fundamental math. Let's talk about the human cost of this meltdown, because behind all these numbers are real people whose lives are being destroyed. There are retirees who sold their homes in other states and bought in Florida, believing they were set for life. Now, their Florida home is worth far less than they paid. Their insurance is costing them $25,000 a year, and they're burning through their retirement savings trying to stay afloat. They can't sell without taking a massive loss they can't afford. They're trapped in a financial nightmare. There are young families who bought their first home in Florida, excited to be homeowners, building equity, living the American dream. Now, they're underwater on their mortgage, their insurance has tripled, and they're facing foreclosure because they simply can't afford the total cost anymore. Their dream has become a catastrophe that will affect their finances for decades. There are middle-aged workers who've been paying mortgages for years, building what they thought was financial security. Now, that security is evaporating as their home values crash and their carrying costs skyrocket. They feel betrayed by a system and a government that was supposed to protect them. And DeSantis? He's begging for help to save himself politically, not to help these people. If he actually cared about Florida residents, he would have taken action years ago when experts were warning about exactly this scenario. He would have acknowledged climate change and implemented adaptation measures. He would have reformed insurance regulation in ways that actually protect consumers. He would have restricted development in the most vulnerable areas. He did none of those things because they conflicted with his ideology and his political brand. Now the crisis he created through neglect and denial is consuming everything, and he's desperately trying to find someone else to fix it. He's reportedly begging insurance companies to stay in Florida or come back, offering regulatory concessions and incentives. But insurance companies aren't leaving because of regulations. They're leaving because the risk is too high and climate change is making it worse. No amount of regulatory giveaways will bring them back as long as Florida faces increasing hurricane risk and rising sea levels. He's reportedly begging the federal government for disaster relief and insurance help. But federal officials are asking the obvious question: why should federal taxpayers bail out Florida's failed policies? Why should the entire country subsidize insurance for people who chose to live in high-risk areas when the state government did nothing to manage those risks? DeSantis has no good answer to that question. He's reportedly begging financial institutions to keep lending in Florida, to not pull back on mortgage originations. But banks and lenders have risk management requirements. They can't issue mortgages on properties that can't be insured or where values are collapsing. They're not being mean, they're being prudent. And DeSantis's begging won't change their fiduciary responsibilities. The meltdown is also affecting Florida's rental market in devastating ways. As homeowners lose their properties to foreclosure, they become renters, increasing demand. As investors who bought properties at the peak realize they're losing money, they're trying to raise rents to cover costs. So renters are getting crushed by rent increases at the same time homeowners are getting crushed by insurance costs. Nobody is escaping this crisis. Local governments across Florida are in panic mode too. Property tax revenues are their primary funding source. When property values crash, tax revenues crater. This forces local governments to either cut services dramatically or raise millage rates, neither of which is politically popular or economically sustainable. Some Florida cities and counties are facing fiscal emergencies where they literally cannot balance their budgets. And when local governments can't provide adequate services, when schools are underfunded, when roads aren't maintained, when police and fire departments are understaffed, that makes the community even less desirable, which drives more people away, which reduces property values further, which cuts tax revenue more. It's another negative feedback loop that's incredibly hard to escape. DeSantis is reportedly asking the legislature for emergency powers and funding to address the crisis, but the legislature is split on what to do. Some Republicans still believe in free market solutions and oppose government intervention. Others recognize the crisis requires action, but don't want to do anything that might be politically unpopular with their base. So there's paralysis at the state level while the situation deteriorates. The begging extends to the tourism industry too. Florida's economy depends heavily on tourism, but the housing crisis is affecting tourism in multiple ways. Hotels and vacation rental properties face massive insurance costs. Tourist areas affected by hurricanes haven't fully recovered. Negative publicity about Florida's problems is making people choose other destinations. Tourism revenue is down, which hits the state economy hard. What's particularly pathetic about DeSantis begging for help is that he spent years denying there was a problem. When people warned about insurance crisis, he downplayed it. When experts warned about climate risks, he banned state employees from even saying climate change. When housing advocates warned about the market overheating, he celebrated rising prices as success. He had years to address these issues before they became catastrophic, and he chose not to because acknowledging the problems conflicted with his political narrative. Now that the problems have become undeniable catastrophes, now that his political future is threatened, suddenly he wants help. But might be too late. Some experts believe Florida's housing market has entered a death spiral that cannot be stopped, only managed. The best-case scenario now is probably years of decline and stagnation before any recovery begins. The worst-case scenario is complete collapse that requires federal intervention and decades to recover from. What should DeSantis have done? He should have acknowledged climate reality years ago and implemented serious adaptation and mitigation measures. He should have restricted development in the most vulnerable areas. He should have reformed insurance regulation to protect consumers while ensuring market stability. He should have invested billions in infrastructure improvements to reduce risk. He should have been honest with Florida residents about the risks they face. He should have governed responsibly instead of playing political games. But he didn't do any of that. And now Florida is in a housing meltdown with no easy solutions. The insurance market is broken. Property values are collapsing. Foreclosures are spiking. Local economies are imploding. And the governor who caused this through negligence and ideology is now begging for something like this. The Floridians watching this understand what might not, at least not soon, and not in the form you need. DeSantis' begging is about saving his political career, not about solving your problems. You need to make realistic assessments of your situation. If you're underwater on your mortgage, understand your options, which might include strategic default. If you're barely affording insurance, understand that it will likely get worse. If you're thinking about buying in Florida, understand you're buying into a crisis that's still unfolding. The Florida housing meltdown is one of the biggest economic disasters in American state history. It's affecting millions of people. It's destroying billions in wealth. It's exposing catastrophic policy failures. And the governor responsible is begging for help because he has no idea how to fix what he broke. This is DeSantis' legacy, a state in meltdown while he desperately tries to find someone else to blame.